Thank you so much for inviting us to speak today. I'd like to introduce Kiri Saul and Litia Tapu, my two colleagues who come here with me. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about data and actually how we hope some of the things we do in terms of data can be useful to you. And we've called this Data to Change Lives. So, wicked policy problems is a term that's used to talk about problems that have complex and interrelated causes and effects, and they're often intertwined. When we try and do something about a wicked policy problem, we're often looking to address multiple aspects of a person's life, and often these are long-haul exercises. They can take some time, and they also often take intersectorial cooperation. So where we hope that data can be useful is at various points in that journey. You know, you might need to check the direction, you might need to check where you're going, and actually, hopefully some of the data that we produce can help you do that. We call this multi-dimensional wellbeing data because it's a more complete picture of the circumstances of people's lives. We don't just ask people about their income, their health, we ask them how they feel about that. When we do our general social survey in Te Kukunga, we actually ask about 14 domains, so it's a very comprehensive sort of picture of a person's life at one point in time. Now, data and measurement doesn't happen in a political or cultural void, it happens within a framework. And when we came to measure Māori wellbeing and sort of developed Te Kukunga, that process was led by Te Tibu, and we kind of tried to marry a Māori worldview to sort of Western economic wellbeing theory. And the result was, well, it was what it was. I thought it was a big success. So our sort of thing at the moment is not to just measure what matters to people, but also to make it count in policy dialogues and service delivery and development. One of the things that we need to do is data is sort of like powdered knowledge. You need to mix it and stir. You need to mix it with knowledge of people like yourselves and create something useful and actually get it used and get applied to realise value from it. So we're not here just to tell you what we know, we're also here to learn from you. And hopefully, by working collaboratively with different sections of the community, Statistics New Zealand can add some value. Now our corporate slogan at the moment is unleashing the power of data to change lives. We won't be able to do that alone, and we can't do that just through data. We need to do it through cooperation and collaboration. So I'm sure you are very familiar with this. It's where we've been, the national average suicide rate, it's been up, it's coming down. We do three main things with statistics. We do prevalence, we do distribution, and we do association. And this is kind of prevalence, and this is a national average. What this really does is cloak a whole lot of stories. It cloaks the story of the complex, interrelated factors that actually contribute to this, and it also cloaks the distribution story, which, again, I'm sure you're all very familiar with. So while overall the rate's coming down, we see the Māori male rate there going up and Māori female rate going up. And you know, I think the rate of suicide for Māori youth is 2.4 times that of non-Māori. So the question then is, well, what can we do about that? I'm sure that's exactly what you are asking yourselves. So it's not just a case of where we've been, it's also a case of where we're going. Now, the projected Māori and Pacific populations are saying over 1 million Māori by 2038, over 500,000 Pacific, up to 650,000 by 2038. At the moment, a third, 33.8 and 35.7 of Pacific, are aged between 0 to 14 years. So from our point of view, how do we kind of get data in products, in forms and in formats that help people invest in the future? So that's a big preoccupation for us. So one of the things we do is measurement beyond GDP, social progress, and we measure subjective well-being. We ask people questions about how they feel about their life at a point of time, their sense of purpose, their sense of control over the circumstances of their lives. Because how people react to circumstances can be just as important as the circumstances themselves. We do that also because outcomes in one area of your life, health for example, impacts on income, income impacts back on health. So you've got to look at combinations of circumstances. And also this notion of multiple disadvantage, actually people get a cluster of outcomes, a cluster of circumstances that don't just stop them from thriving, but can actually also cause them to actually decline and to fail to thrive. So Stiglitz Centre for Tusi reported to Sarkozy in France in 2009. They said every country in the world should be measuring this kind of well-being. New Zealand's been actually quite forward in doing this. We're quite lucky. We've got some rich data sets to look at in this regard. So we collected some waves of the General Social Survey data, and we asked the question, what is it actually that is most associated with overall life satisfaction? So we did multivariate analysis. We controlled for a range of factors. We controlled for everything we could. And we found that this hierarchy for the general population, health, money in terms of adequacy of income, relationships and housing have a really powerful relationship with life satisfaction. And I will attempt to bring up this tool that we developed to show that relationship, and hopefully it's going to work for you, because technology always lets you down at the last moment. So basically, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a picture of how life looks for all the people who told us that they had good health, they weren't lonely, they had enough money, and they lived in decent housing. If you look at this graph down here, nearly all of those people said they were satisfied with their lives. I mean, 1% said they were dissatisfied, but I'm sure they have their own story about that. But the first thing you notice is that, well, you know, 7 out of 10 people hadn't felt lonely. That means 3 out of 10 have. The same sort of ratio of people have problems with their housing. Half of New Zealanders struggle to find enough money to live on. And actually 6 out of 10 New Zealanders consider their health excellent or very good. Now you can kind of play with this tool, and I'll have the link in the presentation. But of the people who said to us that they didn't have good health, they had been lonely, they didn't have enough money, and they didn't live in good housing, this is what the picture of life satisfaction looks like. And the first thing you notice is that half of those people still said that they were satisfied with their lives. A quarter of those people told us they were very dissatisfied or dissatisfied with their lives. And there's a man in Australia, Robert Cummins, and his view is actually that life satisfaction is a binary measure. Whether you measure on a 0 to 10 or a 5-point scale, doesn't matter. You're either coping or you're not coping. And his view is that once people go down the left-hand side of this bar and they go into the sort of black zone, very dissatisfied, he said it's hard to get in and it's hard to get out. So he calls that homeostatic collapse. 6% of New Zealand's population told us that they didn't have these good outcomes. So you can say that half of that 6% is in the bottom area of this graph. And in terms of suicide, I mean, I don't know, but potentially that's possibly where some of the people who contemplate suicide live their lives. So if you look at that and you just sort of say, give someone a house, it doesn't really have much impact in terms of shifting that bar. If you give them enough money to live on, again, it's diminishing, but it's not down at the bottom. If you put in actually freedom from loneliness, it really starts to shift to the right. And then when you add health, you basically see that it's the fourth thing. Now the interesting thing about that is that is what we found for the general population. Let me bring this. But when we talk about te kupunga, Kiri will tell you something about what we found for Māori. So this is the distribution in New Zealand of people who have all 4 good outcomes, 3 good outcomes, 2 good outcomes, 1 good outcome, or no good outcomes. 1 in 5 enjoys all 4. You've got quite a lot of people in the middle, and you've got 6% at the bottom. And the point about this is people are not necessarily trapped in one bar or the other. People oscillate, but someone might go from 0 to 1 back to 0, or 0 to 2 back to 0. But the first thing we said is, okay, who's the group that's actually in the 4 good outcomes? Who's enjoying the best slice of pie in New Zealand? And again, we did multivariate analysis, and we controlled for a whole lot of things, and we found that to enjoy all 4 good outcomes in New Zealand, you kind of tend to look like me. You tend to be older, you tend to be European, born in New Zealand, tertiary qualification, high income household. By that we mean over $100,000 a year, and living in a couple without children, family, which is again tied back to age. Now, if you ask yourself who's not in that group, it's kind of quite a few people. And I suppose for me, as a statistician and as someone who's interested in society, I would like us to get to the point in this country where this is a really mixed story, where it's not such a clear-cut story. So that's part of the work we do with multivariate analysis to look at stuff. Now, just picking up on one of those things, which is loneliness. One of the things that I think is interesting about this, we did some analysis about mental health and loneliness and about the causes of loneliness. And if you look at the dotted line on the top is actually the people who feel lonely a little of the time. The line below is a little bit more, and this dark line at the bottom is the people who feel lonely all of the time. And that's mental health status. So people with poor mental health, if you look at the people who feel lonely all of the time, they're almost exclusively in the poor mental health. Now, we did some measurement of the recent General Social Survey, where we asked people, how would you feel if you had new neighbours who were from a religious minority, ethnic minority, migrants, whatever. People were generally pretty accepting of all groups until they came to the group, someone with a mental health illness, and then they were like 50% of New Zealand said they would not be comfortable. So if you think about the reality that those people face, feeling lonely, and then with the stigma of exclusion, you get that sort of sense of a double whammy for people.
Try holding the mic.
Okay, sorry, I'm a bit rubbish at this.
Can you speak a little bit slower?
Okay. Yeah, I'll try. If you want me to go back over that slide, that's fine.
Continue.
Okay. All right. Cool. This is loneliness by material standard living, and I think both mental health and material standard living have been tied to increased risk of suicide. So the thing that I think is interesting about this, if you look at the dotted line at the top, older people over 65, loneliness goes up really steeply with actually material deprivation. For younger people, it's not so marked, but again, I think the increase in suicide for people aged 65 plus, actually, you know, the material deprivation is an issue.
So, sorry, I think the battery's actually going.
Is it? It's no use. Sorry.
So,
and I suppose, I'll try and shout. I suppose one of the things that I'm kind of interested in this stuff for, what can you change more easily? Where's the point of intervention? For people with complex needs, you can change people's incomes, but loneliness potentially is something that's a lever. And I think when we look at those 4 factors that I had earlier, and I'll just go back to those. If you think about health and money and housing, government and local government is quite powerfully involved in providing health services, redistributing income through the tax system, and providing housing, but the relationships and the loneliness is often the community sector, and it's often part of social services that are quite sort of lightly resourced and struggle for funding. And what I think that the work that we've done is important is because actually people who need to validate what they do and validate their approaches, some of this data can be useful for that. Now, I will hand over to my colleague Kiri, who will talk to you about what happened when we took this generic wellbeing framework and we applied it to wellbeing for Māori.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Tahu o tōku pāpā no ngā tikahu ki te wairua hau, o ngā tipākia hoki au. Ka tuku atu te mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa, kua hui mai nei tēnei rā i rungi i tēnei kaupapa tino whakahirahira. Kei te harupua ngā kau ki te tūkenui a koutou kōrero ai mō tā mātou nei rangahau tuatahi mō te oranga Māori a rā te kupinga. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. And just tell me to speak up if I get a bit quiet, as I can do. Yeah, so as Phil said, I'm going to just give quite a brief overview about Te Kupinga, which is our survey of Māori wellbeing. And just as a matter of interest, have people here heard of it or used it? Yeah. So that's cool, and that's part of what we want to talk about today is maybe ways that this information could be useful in your mahi. And relevant to you. So Te Kupinga was quite groundbreaking for Statistics New Zealand because usually we just do surveys or the census and then we break down general, questions that apply to everybody by different subpopulations, as it's called in a statistical kind of framework. So you end up with Māori or Pacific or Asian kind of breakdowns of data that is really just quite generic for everybody. Whereas the point of Te Kupinga was to create a survey that really was not only incorporating a Māori perspective into it, but was actually for Māori specifically. So Te Kupinga was a sample survey of 5,500 people, Māori only, ethnicity and descent. And in that way we were able to incorporate, you know, a Māori worldview into some of the questions, into the way that we structured the survey. So here's some of the aims that we had, was to measure engagement in Te Ao Māori across the Māori population. So and that included traditional and contemporary cultural identity and connection measures. We needed to measure general wellbeing outcomes and subjective wellbeing outcomes across the Māori population, which is some of the stuff that is in the general social survey, for instance. And so there are sections of the general social survey, which the next slide will talk more to that, that are also in Te Kupinga. And it allows, you know, by combining the general perspectives along with a specifically Māori perspective, it enables us to analyse whether or how engagement in Te Ao Māori is related to wellbeing outcomes for Māori. Yeah, great. Okay, so when we were developing this framework, well, it wasn't me, Te Atawhai Tibu, as Phil alluded to, was the key driver for this survey, and in particular the Māori wellbeing section of the survey was based a lot on the work of you know, Professor Mason Jury and some other very well-known academics in this kind of area. And I know Atawhai went out and talked to a heck of a lot of people and used their whakaaro and the mahi that they'd already done to try and weave that into this general wellbeing framework. So some of the things we've got here is there's 4 broad domains. So you've got the social wellbeing domains that relate to you know, how an individual kind of gets on in the world with other people and connects, and including their whānau. And that was one of probably the first things that was different about Te Kupinga, and it was specifically for Māori, is that it actually, I use the term whānau, and also ask Māori, well, what is whānau? What is whānau for you? You know, it doesn't have to be the, you know, statisticians love to put everyone in boxes, and this is this type of family, and this is this, you know, and you have this, that, and the other. But with Te Kupinga, what we really wanted was for people to tell us what their reality was. So who's in the whānau, how many people are in the whānau, and then a whole range of questions, subjective kind of questions about how well is your whānau doing, are things getting better, how often do you see each other, you know, how often do you have contact, whether that be face-to-face or face-to-Facebook. So that was probably one of the key unique things about Te Kupinga. Then it had the usual economic well-being, kind of paid work and material well-being. So there's some questions in there about agency of income and whether you have enough money to live on. Subjective well-being, about how important culture is to people, how important spirituality is to people. So these are questions you won't necessarily find elsewhere, and that they're asked in the context of a Māori survey, and therefore have hopefully more, you know, a lot more context and meaning for people. And the really key thing about Te Kupinga is it had a whole domain about cultural well-being, and that included traditional connections to identity and culture. Ooh. Okay. Okay. Good. So we looked at both contemporary and traditional. That's scary. Right? Is it?
It's all right, it won't mind.
Righto. Okay, so something that really key stuff about connection to whakapapa. We asked a range of questions about knowing iwi, your hapu, the marae, tipuna, whare tipuna, and along with that, tūranga waiwai, actual, you know, do you go to your marae? How often do you go? Are there barriers to getting there? And what are they? You know, so it's a really rich data source that, you know, the like of official statistics agency hasn't kind of delved into before, so it's quite groundbreaking. And we also then looked at those other expressions, you know, there are other ways that you express your identity. Do you wear an iwi t-shirt? Do you wear a taonga? Is it that you go to kapahaka? You watch Māori TV? So there's a massive amount of data that's sitting on our website just kind of waiting to be looked at and analysed. So I think next one. Okay, so these were some of our key. This was some of our key findings about cultural wellbeing from our first release of information when it came out in 2013. So what we found that was, I mean, it's a lot of it is probably not very new information, but it's information that we now have data and evidence for to back up. So the things that we found were that 70% of Māori felt that involvement, having something to do with Māori culture, was important to them and in their life. That varied across region, but that was the national kind of average. 34%, now that's had visited their ancestral marae in the last 12 months. Now that's actually the national figure, so that also takes into consideration all the people who didn't know their ancestral marae. When you look at people who knew their whare tipuna, then the figure goes up a little bit, but that is the national figure. We also found that there's been quite an increase between 2013 and the 2001 Health of the Māori Language Survey, so over half of Māori can now speak at least some Te Reo Māori. So that just means what we saw has been quite a big increase in those who can speak at the lower end, so kind of moved up from a few words and phrases into not very well or fairly well, whereas at the high end of the very highly proficient speakers who speak very well and well, it's been static for that time. So 84% of Māori had seen whānau not living with them in the last month, and 66% felt spirituality was important. Now, this kind of ties back into what Phil was talking about. The last piece, the latest piece of analysis that we've done, not me personally, it's multivariate, it's very high level. I like doing the infographics and stuff. But the latest piece of analysis that we've been doing and is released on our website at the moment is about life satisfaction specifically for Māori. So what does that look like? You know, particularly, so what are those main determinants of life satisfaction? And as Phil was saying, there's been tons of research done all around the world and lots of very clever people thinking about what goes into it, and the same kind of answers do come up for the general population, and that's the world over, is health, relationships, income adequacy and housing in that order. But what we found when we did our analysis that was quite special and unique for Māori was that the same four things are the most important drivers, but that whanaungatanga, or relationships, as measured through loneliness, has the most impact for Māori. So that's a really big contributor. So if I think back to the presentation before us, I think that came through in your Hope presentation, that loneliness and that whānau connection, you know, is a big part of well-being. Yeah. So, and I think, yeah, that's quite an important thing to note, because that hasn't been found elsewhere, and this is the first time with Te Kupenga that we've been able to actually do analysis of that, to find out, you know, I mean, we all know that whanaungatanga is really, really important, and now we have this evidence to kind of back that up. I think that's all I've got. So I'll hand it over to Litia, And I think we'll take questions afterwards. So, kia ora.
Less than 6 minutes. Kia ora tātou katoa. Ko Litia Tapu ingoa, Litia Tapu taku ingoa, no tonga ahau. Ngā mihi nui atu ki a koutou katoa. So I'm just going to be speaking more or less the same sort of data, but a little bit updated. So we've got the, we just released the New Zealand General Social Survey, that's what we call it. But it's basically just a check-in with individual New Zealanders about their well-being. So we just released it just a little bit over 2 weeks ago. So following that release, there was heaps of media coverage that followed that release. We had about, our own counting, about 40, close to 50 stories in 24 hours. Now this one came up maybe start of last week. So it's by Rob Stock of stuff.co.nz, stuff, the article just saying money buys happiness if you don't forget about love. So that article was all based on the New Zealand General Social Survey. Now, he actually sort of summarized his article as saying there are seemingly about 3 golden rules. And these golden rules, according to the data, rule 1, higher incomes increase the chance of being among the happy. And happy, he used what we call the overall life satisfaction measure. Phil has touched on that. And he called that measure happiness. It's like the survey is basically asking, on a rate of 0 to 10, how are you going? And then this year we started to tease it out a little bit more. We're saying we have a measure we call a sense of purpose. It's asking New Zealanders whether what they're doing is worthwhile. So that was, I'll touch on that later. I'll keep going. So in terms of the highly self-rated well-being at 7 or above, so it's 0 to 10 scale by age, we've got this sort of pattern for the overall life satisfaction, how are you doing, measure. We've got we've talked often about a little U curve. That means that when you start life as a child, your overall life is 50. The survey is actually 15 and above, surveying Kiwis of 15 and above. So as you start out, overall life satisfaction might be high, but then you go in the middle age, maybe your child rearing ages as parents, and then you're up again when you reach at 65 plus. So, but it seems like the sense of purpose variable that we started this year it's got a consistent stepwise function. So the sense of purpose is very strong, say for example, in the middle ages compared to the overall life satisfaction. You can see that mirrored from that graph. Now when we look at Māori and other ethnicity, that sort of picture came out. So European, which is that bar to your left, very high overall life satisfaction. And then Māori next dips in the middle with Pacific also, roughly around the same. And Asian is sort of back up a bit. And when you look at the sense of purpose, we're really, really happy that we did the sense of purpose this year, because we found out that Māori, although their overall life satisfaction is a little bit low, the sense of purpose is really high. So relative to European, and it's second to European, but that's really high. So what they're doing is worthwhile. That's what that's saying. I've got to stop going to that. So as Phil said, we also have look at financial well-being. So according to the data, 79.4% of Māori said they have enough money to meet everyday needs. This goes from just enough money enough money to more than enough money? Those are the kind of questions we ask. And then for Pacific, it's 69.3%, slightly lower, 10% lower, said they have enough money to meet everyday needs compared to Māori. Now you look at the overall picture for New Zealanders, it's 87.8%, European 91.1%, and Asian 85.1%. When we look at the 2014 results for self-rated general health status, I'm out of time.
No, 15 minutes.
81% Māori said they have good health. 85.3% Pacific said they have good health. And for New Zealanders, it's 86.4%, European 87%, and Asians is 90.2%. So you can see the sort of scale that it's probably this is the only one that Pacific has sort of superseded Māori. Housing, no problem with dampness or mold. 55.3%, Māori said no problem with dampness or cold. 45.9% Pacific said no problem with dampness or cold. Compare that to the overall New Zealanders and European, and you know this shift down from 71 to the 50s plus. So the other one is around housing. Housed or flat colder than would like. 58.4% Māori said yes, house or flat colder than would like. But a rocking 70.3% Pacific said yes, house or flat colder than would like. Compare that to New Zealanders, you know, general average and European and Asian. You know. And then the last thing we look at is felt lonely. So there's a question not feel lonely at all, and there's two others that actually rated whether you feel just lonely or similar to the income sort of scenario. So 40.3% Māori said felt lonely, 34.3% Pacific said felt lonely, and compare that to New Zealanders and European. Now this is very interesting to me. I mean, consider I'm Pacific, but so there's quite, we've heard around here today about we live in larger households, and it's quite interesting. So there's more to this, there's more to this than what's actually the data is telling us. So we're back to Rob Stock and his little article, which I really resonated with me. It says parents, in our case, our extended family, get the foundations of education, emotional maturity and work ethic right for your kids, and their chance for happiness increases. Get the foundations wrong and the chance of their being unhappy increases, at least until they get to 65, which the data shows that life is just sweet. So that's my presentation. So we move on. We've got a couple of, more than just one more and a couple of questions. So we just wanted to ask you guys to think about, is the official measure on Māori and Pacific well-being about right, or is it far from it? Why? Are we asking the right questions? How can we make it better? And lastly, how can we use statistics to better understand Māori and Pacific well-being in a smart, meaningful way with a difference in our lives? That means that we can't do everything, but if we can smartly navigate, hopefully we can make it more meaningful. Thank you.